Well, the agency that was created to make sure American nuclear stays safe and that we don't have another 3 Mile Island just gutted its own safety program, and they did so without a single public comment. Last Friday, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission approved the biggest rollback of nuclear safety oversight in 25 years. Safety inspections were cut by 38%, security inspections were cut by 50%, and the post 9/11 program that sent federal agents to simulate terrorist attacks on every U.S. nuclear reactor, the one that Congress mandated after the towers fell, it's now gone. It's been replaced by exercises that the plant runs itself. I'm J.R. Majewski. I spent 23 years inside this industry. I know what these inspections do. I've taken part in them, and I know what happens if they disappear. And what I'm going to walk you through today is not an opinion piece. It's a document trail. And by the end, you're going to understand exactly what was just handed to the industry and who's going to pay the price if something were to go wrong. Now, here's the bottom line up front. The NRC has transferred oversight of America's nuclear power plants from independent federal inspectors to the plants themselves. Not reform, but a blank check. Now, you need to learn how we got here because it didn't happen overnight. Back in 2000, the NRC built what they called the Reactor Oversight Process, and they had a straightforward idea. Federal inspectors would show up at every operating reactor unannounced, and they would look for problems that the plant didn't catch themselves. And it worked. NRC and utility staffers have said on record that they find things that the plant misses, significant things that, if left alone, would become the kind of story that nobody wants to be a part of. Now, that program was just dismantled. Now, here's what the numbers actually mean on the ground. A 38% cut in safety inspection resources. That doesn't mean inspectors show up 38% less. It means entire categories of inspections have been eliminated. Emergency preparedness, the ones that test whether a plant can actually execute an evacuation, that's been cut from annual to every 2 years. Radiation protection, the ones that track whether workers are absorbing dangerous dose, they've been reduced from 7 procedures down to 4. Engineering, which checks whether aging equipment still meets its original safety design, cut from annual inspections to every 3 years. Now, these aren't bureaucratic checkboxes. These are catch points. And the part that should make every American stop cold is that after September 11th, Congress's law that was passed, and was a law, not a suggestion, it required the NRC to send its own people to every U.S. nuclear reactor every 3 years, and it'd simulate a terrorist attack. Now, the reason for that is obvious. A coordinated strike on a nuclear power plant could trigger a meltdown, and these inspections were designed to find out whether the security forces at each plant could actually stop them. That program is being replaced by exercises that the plant will run themselves, and the NRC, they'll just stand on the sidelines as observers. Now, the Union of Concerned Scientists have called this what it is, a WWE match. The outcome, not independent, the threat, not real, and the conflict of interest, baked in. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. The industry has had a strong safety record, and maybe inspectors are just adding additional paperwork. That's the argument being made to justify all of this. So I'm going to punch it right in the face. The NRC's own acting director of regulation made the case for these cuts in a staff video. He said inspections in areas like security and EP, they didn't yield a lot of findings because plants have largely taken control of the programs themselves. Yeah, so his argument for eliminating independent oversight is that the industry is actually doing its job. But that's not the evidence that oversight is unnecessary. That's the definition of a system working as designed, with oversight baked in. Now, we'll never know what the inspectors are preventing because they're preventing them. I mean, the moment you remove them, that's when you could start finding out. But there's another piece of this that everybody's missing entirely. The NRC also changed how future inspection changes are made. Previously, any revisions had to go through the commission, get approval, be heard by the public, and have a recorded vote. Going forward now, the NRC staff, they can just adjust the inspection program on their own. Those changes don't have to be communicated through anything but an internal memo. See, the watchdog just took off its leash, didn't ask for permission, and it didn't have to take comments. Just got out of the yard. I've spent my entire career in the nuclear industry, and I've made the case that nuclear energy is the most reliable, safe, dense, and strategically important power source that we have, and I believe that. And I love the Trump administration's push to expand capacity to 400 gigawatts by 2050. That's a goal that I can fight for. But this deregulation agenda at the NRC, It's taking a hatchet where a scalpel is needed. There's some real bureaucratic bottlenecks that have hurt the industry over the past decade, but there's a difference between cutting red tape and cutting the people who catch the problems that we never want to talk about. Now, here's what this actually costs the American people. The average age of a U.S. nuclear power plant is 42 years old. These are not new machines. They were engineered in an era before modern computing, before the kind of fatigue analysis that we can do today. They've been running longer than anyone originally planned because the country needs the power and the technology works. And a federal inspector showing up to check the equipment to make sure it still meets its original design specs, that's not a regulatory burden. That's basic quality assurance on infrastructure that, if it were to fail badly enough, could render the public in harm's way. In Japan, they learned this lesson in 2011 with Fukushima. And that happened in large part because the government and the utility operating the plant had this culture of self-inspection that masked safety problems until a tsunami came and made it impossible for them to ignore these problems. Now, the former chair of the NRC, he cited Fukushima by name when he was asked about what happens when political influence could capture a regulator. It's not hypothetical, it's a documented failure mode. America is now heading towards a nuclear renaissance with more plants, faster licensing processes, and SMRs in communities that have never hosted nuclear before. And that expansion will only be safe if the oversight infrastructure can keep up with it. And what just happened is the opposite. We're expanding the fleet and shrinking the watchdog at the same time. And the people who are pushing for these changes are the same companies that'll benefit from them. NEI, well, they're the industry's largest trade group. They represent companies like Constellation, companies that have been lobbying for years to kill these programs. And last Friday, they got what they wanted. The NRC's own internal communications, they describe the agency assuming it will, quote, do whatever the White House tells it to do. I don't see that as a regulator. I see that as a rubber stamp. And folks, the cost of getting this wrong is not some bad quarterly report. It's not a fine. It's a potential meltdown or contamination event that could cross state lines. It's an emergency management system that we'll never know if it works until it needed in real time because we didn't test it. I'm not saying this is what's going to happen. I think the fleet in the nuclear industry has earned its safety record, and they have a lot of operators that take their job seriously. But that record was built by a system that included independent oversight. You don't get to remove half that system and claim that the record will still be applied. Now, the NRC was created because the industry couldn't be trusted to inspect itself. Not because the people in it are bad, because most of them are not. But the fact is, their incentives don't align. A plant that finds its own problems has to report them, fix them, and deal with any regulatory consequences. But a plant who doesn't have an inspector showing up will have none of those problems. Right up until it does. That's what just changed. That's what's at stake. And it was done quietly on a Friday without public comment in the middle of a news cycle when everybody was looking somewhere else. I'm J.R. Majewski, and now you know.